What if the problem isn't your boss? What if it's not the company? What if it's not even the work itself? What if the real problem is that you are spending the majority of your waking life disconnected from who you are? Think about it. 5 days a week, 8, 9, sometimes 10 hours a day, not just working, but enduring, counting minutes, waiting for weekends, living for vacations instead of meaning. And here's the dangerous part. We don't call it pain. We call it being responsible. We call it paying the bills. We call it, this is just how life works. But slowly, quietly, something erodes. Your energy fades. Your curiosity disappears. Your confidence shrinks. And one day you wake up and realize you didn't hate the job overnight. You lost yourself one compromise at a time. This isn't a talk about quitting tomorrow. This is a talk about not quitting on yourself, because hating your job isn't a career problem. It's a clarity problem. And clarity, once found, changes everything. Misery is not the price of stability, yet many men have been taught to believe that suffering, quietly, is the definition of responsibility. From a young age, men learn that providing comes first, that endurance equals strength, and that questioning their unhappiness is a luxury they cannot afford. So they stay. They stay in jobs that drain them, silence them, and slowly disconnect them from who they are, convincing themselves that stability means sacrifice of self. Men often confuse stability with safety and safety with worth. When a man's value becomes measured only by consistency of income, the job stops being a role and becomes an identity. He doesn't ask whether the work fits him. He asks whether he can survive another year doing it. Over time, ambition turns into obligation, and purpose is replaced by routine, leaving him functioning but not fulfilled. From a woman's perspective, this quiet misery doesn't look like strength, it looks like distance. When a man comes home emotionally empty, exhausted not just in body but in spirit, the relationship absorbs the cost of that stability. Women often feel the absence before men can name it, the lack of presence, the irritability, the loss of curiosity. What was meant to protect the family slowly begins to erode connection within it. Men are rarely encouraged to talk about this tension because they fear appearing ungrateful or weak. Admitting dissatisfaction feels like failure, especially when others depend on them. So instead of speaking, they numb, they scroll, they withdraw, they distract, telling themselves this is adulthood. But stability that demands emotional shutdown isn't stability, it's survival mode. True stability supports growth rather than suppressing it. When men are aligned with work that reflects their values, they show up differently, not just at the office, but at home. They become more patient partners, more present fathers, more grounded leaders. Women don't need men to suffer for them. They need men who are alive, engaged, and emotionally available, because stability was never meant to cost a man his sense of self. Your paycheck should not cost your identity. Yet many men slowly trade who they are for what they earn without ever noticing the exchange. At first it feels practical, just doing what needs to be done, just pushing through another year. But over time, the job begins to define the man, and the man begins to disappear. He stops introducing himself by what he believes and starts introducing himself by what he does. Men are often praised for being reliable long before they are encouraged to be fulfilled. The message is subtle but consistent. Be useful. Be consistent, be productive. So, when work demands compromise, values bent, instincts ignored, creativity muted, many men accept it as the cost of adulthood. They tell themselves that identity can wait, not realizing that identity erodes quietly when postponed long enough from a woman's perspective. This erosion shows up in ways men rarely see in themselves. She notices when his passion fades, when his humor dulls, when conversations become transactional instead of alive. What she often wants isn't more money or status, but a partner who knows who he is and stands comfortably in that truth. When a man loses his identity at work, he doesn't just lose it there, he brings that loss home. Men struggle to name this because they've been conditioned to link self-worth to income. Question it. The job feels like questioning their value, and that fear keeps them stuck. So they stay silent, believing sacrifice equals love and endurance equals honor, even when the cost is their voice. Identity isn't something found after work, it's something carried into it. When a man works in alignment with his values, he becomes steadier, more confident, and more present. Women don't need men to be endlessly accommodating. They need men who are anchored in who they are, because a paycheck can support a life, but it was never meant to replace a self. Burnout is a symptom, not the disease. Yet many men treat exhaustion as the problem instead of asking what is slowly draining them. They assume they need more rest, a longer weekend, a better routine, but the fatigue returns because the source hasn't changed. When a man wakes up already tired, it's rarely about sleep. It's about spending his energy on something that doesn't give meaning back. Men are taught to push through discomfort, to normalize pressure, and to wear stress like a badge of honor. So when burnout appears, they don't question the system they're in. They question their own resilience. They wonder why they can't handle what others seem to survive, not realizing that the issue isn't strength, it's misalignment. Working hard without purpose doesn't build character, it slowly depletes it. From a woman's perspective, burnout often looks like emotional withdrawal rather than physical fatigue. She notices when he becomes distant, impatient, or numb, even during moments that once brought joy. What men call stress, women experience as disconnection. The long hours meant to provide security end up creating emotional absence, and the relationship quietly pays the price. Men rarely articulate this because burnout feels like personal failure. Admitting that the work no longer fits challenges the story they've told themselves about responsibility and endurance. So instead of changing direction, they numb the signal. They distract themselves, detach from their feelings, and keep going, hoping the emptiness will resolve on its own. Burnout disappears when alignment returns. When a man understands why he does what he does, effort becomes sustainable and pressure becomes meaningful. Women don't need men to be endlessly productive. They need men who are emotionally present and internally steady, because burnout was never the real problem. It was the body and mind warning that something deeper was wrong. You don't need a new job. You need a clear reason, because dissatisfaction rarely comes from the work itself and more often from not knowing why you are doing it. Many men assume the solution is escape, a different role, a different company, a different title. But when the reason stays unclear, the same frustration follows them wherever they go, wearing a new name but carrying the same weight. Men are conditioned to chase outcomes instead of meaning. They pursue promotions, stability, and recognition, believing that achievement will eventually deliver fulfillment. When it doesn't, they feel confused rather than curious. Instead of asking whether the work aligns with their values, they assume something is wrong with them for still feeling empty after checking all the right boxes. From a woman's perspective, this confusion shows up as restlessness. She sees him change jobs or talk about change without clarity, sensing that the dissatisfaction isn't situational but internal. What often matters more than what he does is whether he understands why he does it. A man with a clear reason brings direction into the relationship. A man without one brings uncertainty, even when his career looks successful. Men avoid this deeper question because clarity demands honesty. It requires confronting whether the job supports who they are becoming or simply who they were taught to be. Without a reason, work becomes endurance. With a reason, even difficult work feels intentional. The difference isn't comfort, it's coherence. A clear reason acts as an internal compass. It helps a man decide what to tolerate, what to change, and what to leave. Women don't need men to have perfect careers. They need men who move with purpose and self-awareness, because when the reason is clear, the job becomes a tool rather than a trap, and effort finally starts to make sense. Small courage beats dramatic exits because most men don't actually want to blow up their lives. They want relief, clarity, and a sense of control to have slowly lost. Yet the cultural narrative says that if you hate your job, the only honest response is a bold resignation, a total reinvention, a clean break. That story ignores how men are wired to protect what they've built, even when it no longer serves them. Men carry responsibility differently. They calculate risk not just in personal terms, but in terms of who depends on them. So the idea of quitting feels reckless, while staying feels suffocating. Caught between fear and frustration, many men do nothing, believing inaction is safer than a wrong move. What they rarely hear is that courage doesn't begin with a leap, it begins with a step. From a woman's perspective, dramatic exits are often less reassuring than intentional progress. Sudden decisions can feel destabilizing, not brave. What builds trust is seeing a man engage with his dissatisfaction honestly and consistently. Small acts, setting boundaries, having difficult conversations, reclaiming time, exploring interests. signal self-respect and direction without creating chaos. Men often underestimate the power of these small choices because they don't look heroic. Saying no to unreasonable demands, asking for clarity, or admitting uncertainty doesn't feel like strength in a world that celebrates extremes. But these moments require more courage than quitting in anger because they demand presence instead of escape. Small courage creates momentum. Each deliberate decision reminds a man that he still has agency, within constraints. He starts to feel less trapped, not because the job has changed, but because his relationship to it has. Women notice this shift not in words, but in energy, more confidence, more steadiness, more emotional availability. Over time, these small acts accumulate into real change. They clarify what can be fixed and what cannot. They transform fear into information and frustration into direction. Men don't need to burn everything down to reclaim themselves. They need the courage to move forward one honest choice at a time in ways that protect both their future and the people they care about. Work should fund your life, not replace it. Yet many men slowly allow their job to consume the space where their identity, relationships, and joy were meant to live. What begins as dedication turns into over-identification, and eventually the calendar fills with meetings while life gets postponed. The danger isn't hard work, it's when work becomes the only place a man feels useful or valued. Men are often praised for sacrifice, not balance. Long hours are rewarded, availability is expected, and exhaustion is normalized. Over time, a man stops asking whether his work supports the life he wants and starts shaping his life around the demands of work. His hobbies disappear, friendships fade, and rest feels undeserved, all justified by the belief that providing is the same as living. From a woman's perspective, this replacement is felt long before it's understood. She experienced the missed moments, the half-listening conversations, the emotional absence that no promotion can compensate for. What women often want isn't less ambition, but clearer boundaries. They want to share a life with someone who is present, not compete with a job that never turns off. Men rarely recognize how deeply work has taken over because the takeover feels responsible. When their sense of worth is tied to productivity, stepping back feels like failure, so they keep going, convincing themselves that this phase is temporary, even as months turn into years. The job becomes the center, and everything else becomes peripheral. A funded life has room for relationships, health, curiosity, and meaning. When work stays in its place, men show up more grounded and less reactive. They listen better, lead better, and connect more deeply because their energy isn't constantly depleted. Women notice the difference in consistency and presence, not in titles or income. Men don't lose themselves all at once. They lose themselves by letting work expand unchecked. Reclaiming life doesn't require abandoning ambition, but redefining success in human terms. When work supports life instead of replacing it, men become more than providers. They become participants in the lives they're working so hard to sustain.